Marshmallow. How do you get your teeth into it? It's a subject that a whole lot of people don't know much about, but there's a whole lot of information out there that can be made known to folks. And how I'm going to do that in 15 minutes is talk fast. Now, I got started talking about Black Indians when I was a student of Angie DeBose back in 1959. And she was my mentor then for 30 years after that, and sort of guided me into that subject. But having grown up in northeastern Oklahoma, I knew that there were people who belonged to the Cherokee Nation who were African descended, and then when I went on to Oklahoma State University, I ran into a lot of those descendants as classmates. And so it was a subject that I had lived with growing up. But anyway, the largest number of African descended people who belong to Indian tribes are those that are affiliated with 5 tribes of Oklahoma, 5 civilized tribes. And those are the ones that I've spent a good bit of time studying, simply because that was the home state and it was areas that I knew something about. When the United States decided to remove the tribes, they were insistent that the slaves and free blacks who were living in those tribal nations went with the tribe, because if you go back to the 18th century and look at travelers' accounts of so-called slavery in the 5 tribes, you find out that it wasn't chattel slavery like we think of as in the white South. It was a different kind of relationship that existed between the African people and the Indian people. And so the general consensus was in the South that the relationship between Indians and their slaves, so-called slaves, was such a relaxed relationship that these people would only be causing trouble if they were left in the South and integrated into plantation slavery in the South. So the federal government made sure that the slaves were removed with the tribes. And in one case, in the Seminole case, when some of the title to the slaves were contested, the federal government bought the slaves and took them to New Orleans and then let them come on. And when that group came through Arkansas, they came without an escort. They walked right through what's now North Little Rock and went on up the road. So we don't know exactly how many people we're talking about in removal, because all of the rosters for removal don't exist. But for tribes like the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, Seminoles, we have good lists of people. In fact, in some of the Seminoles, the family histories go back into the 18th century. Because when they would ask a black person, to whom do you belong, they would give the name of chief. And so in the treatments of slavery in the Seminole Nation, you see all these chiefs who had all these slaves, but they didn't have those slaves. They didn't have title to them. When they say, to whom do you belong, the people were saying, we belong to this chief's band. He was the leader they belonged to. He wasn't the person who had a title to them. And in fact, you won't find many titles. If you go into courthouses after the state of Georgia, for instance, took over Cherokee Nation and looked for titles to slaves, you won't find them. Very few of them. But you will find lots of documents that have to do with slaves, that the tribal people went into the courthouse and recorded the slaves. I was talking about this one time to a group of Muskogee Creek people, and afterwards this Creek elder came up to me and he said, you know, he said, all those lists that they took into the courthouse, he said they weren't people that they had title to. He said a lot of those were family members and they were protecting them by saying they belonged to them. And so if you go into those courthouses back there, if you've got tribal history, go into those courthouses back there, make sure, Alabama, Mississippi particularly, you ask for orphans court records, because they were not, Indians were not looked at as adults. They were treated like children or orphans, and those are where the records are. They won't be with the regular deed records that you find in other courthouses in the South. So the records back there are lots of them that exist for those who are interested in doing genealogy. It's going to be hit or miss because most of the tribes didn't keep records back then. And so you look at records like the WPA oral interviews for Oklahoma that were done in 1937. These were the old children and grandchildren of people that actually made the trek. And a lot of them talk about the family history and whether or not there were people of African descent that came with them on that trail. But it's been difficult to, yes?
Weren't the African, the ones that were here then when they came back in that time, weren't they like the travelers? Weren't they the ones that led them on the voyage?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Were they not the ones that led them on the voyage up the Trail of Tears? The African Indian descendants?
Some of them did, and some of them led contingents themselves, yes.
Okay.
In fact, there was one Seminole group that ran aground down here at Fish Bar, which was at the mouth of Fish Creek, and because it ran out of water on steamboats, and they had to get out and walk up the riverbed to Little Rock, hire wagons, and go from there on. And the military officer who was the dispersing agent for that group ran out of money, so he had to borrow it from Gopher John or John Warrior or John Cavallo, whatever name he went by. But he was a black warrior that fought with the Seminoles and had a large contingent of warriors under him in the First Seminole War. And he was a fairly affluent person by the time he got to the West. But they had to borrow the money from him to go on. So, and then there were others that were led by Black Tustanuggies or some other office in the tribe.
So what all tribes do we have to look for here in the States? What tribes are we, what tribes have been identified in the States as far as the Indian tribes that are here?
I'm still having trouble hearing.
What Indian tribes?
Tesla's stock is crashing. The headlines say Elon's empire is collapsing. But what if they're all dead wrong? Tech insider Jeff Brown, the man who told everybody to buy Tesla back